Question 1. The assessment process reveals a situation where an insurer has paid a claim for property damage caused by a faulty product manufactured by a third party. The insurance policy contains a standard subrogation clause. Additionally, a specific state statute exists that outlines the rights of insurers to recover from manufacturers of defective products. The subrogation professional must determine the most appropriate legal basis for pursuing recovery from the manufacturer. Which of the following represents the most accurate and professionally sound approach to classifying the subrogation type? Option A. A hybrid approach combining contractual and statutory subrogation, as both legal bases are present. Option B. Contractual subrogation, as the insurance policy explicitly grants the insurer the right to pursue recovery. Option C. Equitable subrogation, as the insurer has paid a claim and it would be inequitable for the responsible manufacturer to avoid liability. Option D. Statutory subrogation, based on the existence of a state law specifically addressing insurer recovery from manufacturers of defective products. Correct answer is B. Contractual subrogation, as the insurance policy explicitly grants the insurer the right to pursue recovery. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the different types of subrogation and their specific legal foundations, particularly within the context of the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional (CSRP) exam's jurisdiction. The core difficulty lies in accurately identifying the basis for a subrogation claim when multiple potential avenues exist, and incorrectly classifying the subrogation type can lead to significant procedural errors, missed recovery opportunities, or even the complete failure of the claim. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between rights arising from a contract, principles of equity, and specific legislative mandates. The correct approach involves meticulously analyzing the underlying agreements and circumstances to determine the primary legal basis for the subrogation right. If a clear contractual provision grants the insurer the right to step into the shoes of the insured and pursue a responsible third party, then contractual subrogation is the appropriate classification. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the explicit terms agreed upon by the parties, providing a strong and unambiguous legal foundation for the recovery action. Regulatory frameworks governing insurance and subrogation typically uphold the enforceability of such contractual rights, provided they are not otherwise prohibited or limited by law. An incorrect approach would be to assume statutory subrogation applies solely because a statute exists that generally permits subrogation in certain types of insurance claims, without first confirming if a specific contractual right exists or if the statute mandates a particular form of subrogation. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because it bypasses the primary source of the subrogation right, the contract, and misapplies the statutory authority, potentially leading to a claim being dismissed if the statutory requirements are not met or if the contract provides a more direct and enforceable path. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on equitable subrogation when a clear contractual right exists. Equitable subrogation is a doctrine of last resort, invoked when no express contractual right is present, but fairness and justice demand that the insurer be allowed to recover. To pursue equitable subrogation when a contractual right is available is an inefficient and potentially flawed strategy, as it introduces the complexities and discretionary elements inherent in equitable principles, which may not be as straightforward or as robust as a clearly defined contractual right. This can lead to regulatory scrutiny for failing to pursue the most direct and legally sound path to recovery. A further incorrect approach is to conflate the different types of subrogation. For example, by arguing for statutory subrogation based on general principles of fairness rather than specific legislative language. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the distinct legal underpinnings of each subrogation type and can lead to misapplication of legal precedent and procedural errors, potentially jeopardizing the recovery effort and violating professional standards of competence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all relevant documentation, including insurance policies, contracts with third parties, and applicable statutes. The professional must first identify any express subrogation clauses within the insurance policy or related agreements. If a contractual right is clearly established, that should be the primary basis for the subrogation action. If no contractual right exists, The professional should then investigate whether specific statutes grant subrogation rights in the given circumstances. Only if neither a contractual nor a statutory right is clearly applicable should the professional consider equitable subrogation, carefully evaluating the specific facts and the principles of fairness and justice that would support such a claim. This tiered approach ensures that the strongest and most legally defensible basis for subrogation is pursued, adhering to regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that a subrogation claim involves a fire that destroyed a 10-year-old, custom-built entertainment center. The policyholder has provided documentation confirming they have already purchased a new, comparable entertainment center to replace the destroyed one. The subrogation professional is considering how to value the destroyed property for recovery purposes. Option A. Value the damaged property based on a generic industry average for similar items, regardless of policyholder actions. Option B. Value the damaged property at its actual cash value, accounting for depreciation. Option C. Value the damaged property at its replacement cost, as the policyholder has replaced the item. Option D. Value the damaged property at a depreciated value that is lower than the actual replacement cost to expedite settlement. The correct answer is C. Value the damaged property at its replacement cost, as the policyholder has replaced the item. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of property damage valuation methods, specifically actual cash value (ACV) and replacement cost (RC), within the context of subrogation recovery. The challenge lies in accurately determining the appropriate valuation method to ensure a fair and legally defensible recovery amount, avoiding both underrecovery and overrecovery, which can have significant financial and ethical implications. The insurer's subrogation professional must navigate potential disputes with the at-fault party and their insurer, as well as internal policy requirements. The correct approach involves valuing the damaged property at its replacement cost, RC, when the policyholder has actually replaced or intends to replace the damaged property. This aligns with the principle of making the insured whole, as intended by many property insurance policies, and is often supported by regulatory frameworks that aim to prevent unjust enrichment or underindemnification. In subrogation, recovering the full cost of replacement, where applicable, ensures that the subrogating insurer is made whole for the full extent of the loss they indemnified. This method is ethically sound, as it reflects the actual financial outlay or commitment made by the insured. Valuing the damaged property at its actual cash value (ACV) would be an incorrect approach in this specific scenario if the policyholder has replaced the item. ACV represents the RC of an item minus depreciation, while ACV is a valid valuation method for many claims. Applying it when RC is appropriate would lead to an underrecovery for the insurer and potentially leave the insured underindemnified if they have incurred the higher replacement cost. This failure to recover the full indemnified amount could be seen as a breach of the insurer's duty to its policyholder and a failure to pursue a complete subrogation recovery, potentially violating internal guidelines and the spirit of subrogation. Another incorrect approach would be to arbitrarily choose a valuation method without considering the policy terms, the insured's actions, and the specific nature of the damaged property. This lack of diligence could lead to an inaccurate valuation, either overstating or understating the recoverable amount. Ethically, this demonstrates a failure to exercise professional judgment and adhere to established valuation principles, potentially exposing the insurer to financial loss or disputes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the insurance policy to understand the coverage for ACV versus RC. It requires gathering evidence of the insured's actions regarding replacement of the damaged property. Consulting with claims adjusters and potentially property experts can provide accurate estimates for both ACV and RC. The subrogation professional must then apply the appropriate valuation method based on the policy language and the factual circumstances, ensuring that the recovery sought is legally sound, ethically justifiable, and aligns with the goal of making the insurer whole. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that a subrogation professional has initiated a subrogation action against a third-party tortfeasor based on the insured's failure to report a property damage incident for over 6 months. The insurance policy contains a cooperation clause requiring the insured to promptly notify the insurer of any loss. The professional's file indicates no further investigation into whether this delay prejudiced the insurer's ability to recover from the third party or any attempts to discuss the delay with the insured. What is the most appropriate next step for the subrogation professional? Option A. Advise the insurer to consider a policy exclusion for delayed reporting to avoid future subrogation issues. Option B. Proceed with the subrogation action, arguing that any delay in reporting by the insured automatically forfeits their right to subrogation recovery. Option C. Immediately cease the subrogation action and inform the insured that no recovery is possible due to their reporting delay. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the insurance policy's cooperation clause, applicable state statutes governing subrogation, and relevant case law to determine if the insured's delay constitutes a material breach that prejudiced the insurer's subrogation rights, and if so, assess the viability of the current action. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease the subrogation action and inform the insured that no recovery is possible due to their reporting delay. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the subrogation professional to navigate the delicate balance between pursuing recovery and adhering to the principles of good faith and fair dealing inherent in insurance contracts. Misinterpreting the scope of the insured's cooperation obligations or the insurer's duty to protect the insured's interests can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. The professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure that recovery efforts do not prejudice the insured or violate established legal precedents regarding subrogation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the insurance policy, applicable state statutes governing subrogation, and relevant case law. This approach prioritizes understanding the precise contractual and legal rights and obligations of both the insurer and the insured. Specifically, it requires confirming that the insured's actions, or inactions, constitute a breach of their duty to cooperate, which is a common prerequisite for the insurer to pursue subrogation against a third party. It also necessitates ensuring that the proposed subrogation action is legally permissible and does not violate any doctrines that might bar recovery, such as the made-whole doctrine or principles of equitable subrogation, depending on the specific jurisdiction's interpretation. This meticulous legal and contractual analysis forms the bedrock of a legally sound and ethically defensible subrogation claim. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately pursuing subrogation against the third party based solely on the insured's failure to report the incident promptly. This fails to acknowledge that the insured's duty to cooperate typically requires more than just timely reporting. It often involves providing information, attending examinations, and assisting in the investigation and defense. Without establishing a material breach of a specific cooperation clause that directly prejudices the insurer's subrogation rights, this immediate pursuit is premature and potentially violates the insurer's duty to act in good faith. Another incorrect approach is to abandon subrogation efforts entirely due to the insured's delay in reporting, without investigating whether the delay actually impaired the insurer's ability to recover from the third party. The insured's breach must have a causal link to the loss of subrogation rights. A failure to investigate this causal link means the insurer might be foregoing a valid recovery opportunity, potentially breaching its fiduciary duty to its policyholders and shareholders. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with subrogation without first attempting to resolve the issue with the insured or exploring alternative solutions that might preserve subrogation rights while accommodating the insured's circumstances. This can be seen as an adversarial stance that disregards the ongoing insurer-insured relationship and may not align with the insurer's broader obligations to its policyholders. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach that begins with a comprehensive review of the insurance contract and all relevant legal authorities. This includes identifying the specific policy provisions related to cooperation and subrogation, as well as understanding the jurisdictional nuances of doctrine like the made-whole, rule, and waiver of subrogation. The next step is to assess the factual circumstances to determine if the insured's actions constitute a material breach of their obligations, and if that breach has demonstrably prejudiced the insurer's subrogation rights. If these conditions are met, the professional should then consider the most effective and legally sound method for pursuing recovery, always mindful of the insurer's duty of good faith and fair dealing. Communication with the insured and exploration of amicable resolutions should be considered where appropriate, but the ultimate decision must be grounded in a rigorous legal and factual analysis. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that a subrogation recovery professional operating under a contract with an insurance company has engaged an independent contractor to perform certain investigative tasks related to a claim. The insurance company has provided general guidelines, but has not dictated the specific methods the independent contractor must use. The independent contractor, while performing these tasks, commits an act that causes financial harm to a third party. Which approach best assesses the potential for vicarious liability for the insurance company? Option A. Assume no vicarious liability for the insurance company as the independent contractor is not a direct employee. Option B. Focus on the direct actions of the independent contractor and the absence of a direct employment relationship with the insurance company. Option C. Prioritize the immediate recovery of funds for the insurance company, deferring any liability assessment until a claim is formally filed. Option D. Analyze the degree of control the insurance company, through the recovery professional, exercises over the independent contractor's methods and the scope of their assigned duties. The correct answer is B. Focus on the direct actions of the independent contractor and the absence of a direct employment relationship with the insurance company. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of vicarious liability principles within the specific regulatory framework governing subrogation recovery professionals. The core difficulty lies in accurately assessing the extent to which a recovery professional's actions or omissions can create liability for their principal, e.g., an insurer or a third party, especially when dealing with independent contractors or agents. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between direct liability and vicarious liability, and to apply the relevant legal tests for agency and control. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment that meticulously analyzes the contractual relationships, the degree of control exercised by the principal over the recovery professional's actions, and the foreseeability of the harm caused. This approach is right because it directly addresses the legal elements of vicarious liability, which typically hinge on the existence of an employer-employee or principal-agent relationship, and whether the wrongful act occurred within the scope of that relationship. Regulatory guidelines for subrogation professionals often emphasize due diligence and adherence to ethical standards, which inherently includes understanding and mitigating potential liabilities arising from their operations. By focusing on the control test and the scope of employment/agency, this approach aligns with the legal precedents and regulatory expectations that govern professional conduct in recovery and subrogation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the recovery professional's direct actions without considering the principal's potential vicarious liability fails to acknowledge the legal doctrine of vicarious liability. This oversight can lead to underestimation of risk and inadequate mitigation strategies, potentially exposing the principal to unforeseen financial and legal consequences. Another incorrect approach that assumes no vicarious liability can exist if the recovery professional is classified as an independent contractor, without a deeper examination of the actual working relationship and the degree of control exerted, is also flawed. Courts often look beyond the label of independent contractor to the substance of the relationship. If the principal exercises significant control over the manner and means of the recovery professional's work, vicarious liability may still attach. This approach ignores the critical control test and can lead to a false sense of security. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate recovery over a comprehensive risk assessment, potentially leading to aggressive tactics that could be deemed outside the scope of authorized actions, is ethically and legally unsound. While efficient recovery is a goal, it must be pursued within legal and ethical boundaries. Actions taken outside the scope of authority, even if intended to benefit the principal, may not trigger vicarious liability, but can lead to direct liability for the recovery professional and potentially other claims against the principal. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This framework should begin with identifying all parties involved and their contractual relationships. Next, it requires a detailed analysis of the control exerted by the principal over the recovery professional's activities. This includes examining how work is assigned, supervised, and evaluated. Subsequently, the professional must assess whether the alleged wrongful act or omission occurred within the scope of the recovery professional's duties and authority granted by the principal. Finally, the assessment should consider the relevant legal precedents and regulatory guidelines applicable to subrogation recovery professionals in the governing jurisdiction to determine the likelihood and extent of potential vicarious liability. Question 5. The control framework reveals that a subrogation professional is evaluating a complex claim involving multiple parties and significant property damage. The insured's policy has a deductible, and the subrogation potential appears strong, but the opposing party is disputing liability and has raised potential comparative negligence arguments. Professional needs to develop a negotiation strategy that optimizes recovery while managing the inherent risks and costs associated with pursuing the claim. Which of the following negotiation strategies best aligns with the principles of process optimization and maximizing subrogation recovery within a regulatory compliant framework? Option A. Focus solely on the insured's deductible recovery, neglecting the insurer's interest in recovering the full amount paid. To expedite the process, Option B. Immediately offer to settle for a nominal amount to close the file quickly and minimize administrative expenses, regardless of the claim's actual value. Option C. Adopt an uncompromising stance, demanding full recovery of all damages without considering any potential weaknesses in the claim or the opposing party's defenses, and prepare for protracted litigation. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all evidence, establish a well-defined settlement range based on liability and damages, and engage in good faith negotiations, presenting a clear, evidence-based case while remaining open to reasonable compromise. The correct answer is B. Immediately offer to settle for a nominal amount to close the file quickly and minimize administrative expenses, regardless of the claim's actual value. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in subrogation negotiations, balancing the desire for a swift and cost-effective settlement with the fiduciary duty to maximize recovery for the insurer. The subrogation professional must navigate the opposing party's resistance, potential legal complexities, and the insurer's risk tolerance. The challenge lies in identifying the optimal point of compromise that aligns with the insurer's best interests while adhering to ethical and regulatory obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough pre-negotiation analysis of all available evidence, including the insured's damages, liability assessments, and any applicable policy limitations or exclusions. This analysis informs a well-reasoned settlement range, grounded in the strength of the subrogation claim. During negotiation, the professional should present a clear, evidence-based case for liability and damages, demonstrating a willingness to engage in good faith discussions. The strategy should be to leverage the strength of the claim to achieve a settlement that reflects a reasonable recovery, considering the costs and risks of litigation. This approach aligns with the CSRP duty to act with diligence and skill, ensuring that settlements are fair and justifiable, thereby protecting the insurer's assets and upholding professional standards. Regulatory frameworks for subrogation professionals emphasize acting in the best interest of the insurer and pursuing recovery diligently and ethically. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that prioritizes immediate settlement solely to reduce administrative costs without a robust evaluation of the claim's merits, fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to maximize recovery. This could lead to accepting an offer significantly below the potential recovery, which is a breach of professional responsibility and potentially violates guidelines requiring diligent pursuit of subrogation rights. Another incorrect approach is to adopt an overly aggressive or inflexible stance, refusing any compromise even when presented with legitimate counterarguments or evidence that weakens the subrogation claim. This can lead to unnecessary litigation, increased costs, and potentially a less favorable outcome than negotiated settlement, demonstrating a lack of sound judgment and negotiation skill. Finally, an approach that involves misrepresenting facts or evidence to pressure the opposing party into a settlement is unethical and illegal. Such actions violate principles of good faith negotiation and can have severe legal and professional repercussions, including disciplinary action and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach subrogation negotiations with a clear understanding of the claim's strengths and weaknesses, informed by a comprehensive review of all relevant documentation. They should establish a defined settlement range based on this analysis, allowing for flexibility within that range to accommodate good faith negotiations. Effective communication, a willingness to listen to the opposing party's perspective, and the ability to articulate a compelling case are crucial. The decision-making process should always prioritize the insurer's best interests, balancing the potential for recovery against the costs and risks of further action, while strictly adhering to all applicable laws and ethical guidelines. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a recovery professional has identified a potential settlement for a subrogation claim that is slightly above their current delegated settlement authority limit. The third party has indicated this is their final offer. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to regulatory compliance and professional responsibility? Option A. Immediately seek written approval from the appropriate internal authority within the insurance company for the proposed settlement amount before communicating acceptance to the third party. Option B. Decline the settlement offer as it exceeds the recovery professional's authority and inform the third party that no further negotiation is possible within the current parameters. Option C. Inform the third party that the offer is unacceptable due to exceeding the recovery professional's authority and attempt to negotiate a lower amount that falls within the current limits. Option D. Proceed with the settlement, making a verbal commitment to the third party that the insurer will approve it later, and then seek retrospective written approval. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the settlement, making a verbal commitment to the third party that the insurer will approve it later, and then seek retrospective written approval. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the delicate balance between achieving a favorable settlement for the insurer and adhering strictly to the defined settlement authority limits. Exceeding these limits, even with the perceived best interests of the insurer in mind, can lead to significant regulatory repercussions, internal policy violations, and potential financial exposure. The recovery professional must exercise sound judgment, understanding the nuances of their delegated authority and the potential consequences of overstepping it. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously reviewing the claim file to confirm the precise settlement authority granted by the insurer. This includes understanding any specific conditions, thresholds, or approval processes tied to that authority. If the proposed settlement amount falls within the established limits, the recovery professional can proceed with the settlement negotiation and execution, ensuring all documentation accurately reflects the agreement and complies with internal procedures. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principle of operating strictly within delegated authority, a fundamental requirement for regulatory compliance and internal control. Adhering to these limits prevents unauthorized actions, maintains the integrity of the recovery process, and avoids potential disciplinary actions or financial penalties. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with a settlement that exceeds the clearly defined settlement authority based on a personal belief that it is the best deal for the insurer. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it disregards the explicit limitations placed upon the recovery professional by their principal. Insurers delegate specific authority for a reason, often tied to risk management, financial controls, and internal approval hierarchies. Acting beyond this authority undermines these controls and can lead to the insurer disavowing the settlement, incurring unauthorized financial commitments, or facing regulatory scrutiny for improper claims handling. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to secure a settlement that exceeds the authority by making verbal assurances to the third party that the settlement will be approved later, without obtaining prior written approval from the insurer. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Verbal assurances are not binding and can lead to disputes. More importantly, it bypasses the required internal approval process, which is a critical control mechanism. This action demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for established procedures, potentially exposing the insurer to liability and the recovery professional to disciplinary action. A further incorrect approach is to delay the settlement process indefinitely, hoping that the settlement authority might be implicitly expanded over time without seeking formal confirmation. This is a failure in professional diligence and adherence to regulatory expectations. Settlement authority is typically explicit and time-bound. Waiting without seeking clarification or formal approval can jeopardize the recovery opportunity, potentially leading to the statute of limitations expiring or the third party withdrawing their offer. It also indicates a lack of proactive management of the claim within the established parameters. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize understanding and operating within their defined settlement authority. This requires a proactive approach to reviewing claim files, understanding policy limits, and confirming delegated authority levels. When a settlement opportunity arises, first step should always be to verify if the proposed amount falls within the authorized limits. If it exceeds these limits, the professional must follow the established escalation procedures, which typically involve seeking written approval from a supervisor or designated authority within the insurance company. Maintaining clear, documented communication regarding settlement authority and approvals is paramount to ensuring regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Question 7. The audit findings indicate that a subrogation professional, in pursuing recovery from a third-party tortfeasor following a property loss, failed to adequately investigate whether the insurer's own claims handling practices may have exacerbated the damage or contributed to the loss, instead focusing solely on the third party's liability. Which of the following actions best reflects the professional and regulatory obligation in this scenario? Option A. Immediately settle the subrogation claim with the third party for the maximum amount recoverable, regardless of whether this fully compensates the insured for their total losses. Option B. Proceed with subrogation against the third party, arguing that the insured's damages are solely attributable to the tortfeasor's actions, and do not consider any potential insurer contribution to the loss. Option C. Immediately cease all subrogation efforts and inform the insured that the insurer's actions may have compromised their ability to recover, while also reviewing internal claims handling procedures. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the insurer's claims handling to determine if any actions or inactions contributed to the loss or its severity, and adjust the subrogation strategy accordingly, potentially including a reduction in the subrogation demand or a waiver if appropriate. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease all subrogation efforts and inform the insured that the insurer's actions may have compromised their ability to recover, while also reviewing internal claims handling procedures. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breach of the duty of good faith and fair dealing, a fundamental principle in insurance contracts and subrogation recovery. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the insurer's right to recover against the insured's reasonable expectations and the insurer's own obligations. A subrogation professional must navigate complex factual circumstances and apply legal and ethical standards to ensure fair treatment of the insured while pursuing recovery. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the insured's actions and the circumstances surrounding the loss to determine if any actions or inactions by the insurer or its representatives contributed to the loss or hindered the insured's ability to mitigate damages. This approach prioritizes understanding the full context before making decisions about recovery efforts. It aligns with the regulatory framework governing insurance practices, which mandates that insurers act in good faith towards their policyholders. Specifically, under common law principles often reflected in state insurance regulations, assuming a U.S. jurisdiction for the CSRP exam. The duty of good faith and fair dealing implies that neither party will do anything to injure the right of the other party to receive the benefits of the agreement. This includes refraining from actions that would unfairly prejudice the insured's position or deny them the full benefit of their coverage. An incorrect approach would be to immediately pursue subrogation against a third party without first assessing whether the insurer's own conduct played a role in the loss or its severity. This fails to uphold the duty of good faith because it prioritizes recovery over the insurer's obligation to deal fairly with its insured. It could be seen as an attempt to shift blame or financial responsibility without a complete and impartial evaluation of all contributing factors. Another incorrect approach would be to abandon subrogation efforts solely because the insured expressed dissatisfaction with the insurer's handling of the claim, without a proper investigation into the validity of those concerns. This could violate the duty of good faith by failing to diligently pursue a legitimate recovery opportunity that could benefit both the insurer and potentially the insured through lower future premiums or a more robust claims process. It also fails to meet the obligation to act fairly and impartially. A third incorrect approach would be to settle with the third-party tortfeasor for an amount that does not fully compensate the insured for their losses, simply to expedite the subrogation process. This directly violates the duty of good faith and fair dealing by failing to ensure the insured is made whole and by prioritizing expediency over the insured's contractual rights. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-step approach. First, gather all relevant facts and documentation. Second, analyze the conduct of all parties involved, including the insurer, the insured, and the third-party tortfeasor. Third, assess the legal and contractual obligations of each party. Fourth, determine the best course of action that upholds the duty of good faith and fair dealing while effectively pursuing subrogation rights. This requires a commitment to fairness, thoroughness, and adherence to regulatory and ethical standards. Question 8. Compliance review shows that a CSRP candidate is preparing for an exam that strictly mandates adherence to U.S. federal and state laws. The candidate is researching the legal precedent for a specific subrogation claim involving a defective product. Which research approach best optimizes the process for absolute jurisdictional priority as required by the exam? Option A. Relying on a legal blog post that summarizes recent product liability case law, assuming it covers the relevant U.S. jurisdictions. Option B. Employing a legal research platform specifically configured to search only U.S. federal and state court decisions, with advanced filtering options for specific state statutes and federal regulations. Option C. Utilizing a comprehensive legal database that aggregates case law from all U.S. federal and state jurisdictions, then manually filtering results for relevance and jurisdiction. Option D. Consulting a general international law database to identify common principles of product liability, then attempting to adapt them to U.S. law. The correct answer is C. Utilizing a comprehensive legal database that aggregates case law from all U.S. federal and state jurisdictions, then manually filtering results for relevance and jurisdiction. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate complex legal research while adhering to strict jurisdictional limitations for the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional (CSRP) exam. The core challenge lies in identifying and applying the correct legal framework without inadvertently referencing or being influenced by external jurisdictions, which is a critical exam requirement. The professional must demonstrate a nuanced understanding of how to conduct research that is exclusively within the specified regulatory boundaries. The correct approach involves a systematic process of identifying the relevant legal databases and research tools that are explicitly sanctioned or demonstrably operate within the exam's defined jurisdiction. This includes prioritizing official government websites, recognized legal databases that filter by jurisdiction, and case law repositories specific to that jurisdiction. The justification for this approach is rooted in the exam's absolute priority requirement for strict jurisdictional compliance. By limiting research to these sources, the professional ensures that all legal analysis is grounded in the applicable laws and regulations, thereby meeting the exam's core objective of testing jurisdiction-specific knowledge and adherence to its rules. An incorrect approach would be to utilize broad, general legal search engines or databases that do not offer robust jurisdictional filtering. This is a regulatory failure because it increases the risk of encountering and applying laws or precedents from outside the specified jurisdiction, directly violating the exam's strict compliance mandate. Another incorrect approach is to rely on secondary legal sources or summaries that may not accurately reflect the nuances of the primary law within the required jurisdiction, or worse, may have been compiled with a broader, multi-jurisdictional perspective. This fails to meet the deep analysis requirement and risks misinterpreting or misapplying the law. A third incorrect approach is to consult with legal professionals or colleagues who may inadvertently introduce knowledge or interpretations from other jurisdictions, even if their intent is helpful. This is an ethical failure as it circumvents the exam's intent to assess independent, jurisdiction-bound research and analysis. Professionals should approach similar situations by first meticulously identifying and understanding the precise jurisdictional boundaries set by the exam or governing body. They should then proactively select research tools and resources that are known to operate exclusively within those boundaries. If ambiguity exists about a resource's jurisdictional scope, it should be avoided or its output critically cross-referenced against known authoritative sources within the required jurisdiction. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to the explicit rules of engagement for the task at hand, recognizing that even minor deviations can lead to significant compliance failures. Question 9. Compliance review shows that a subrogation professional is investigating a complex product liability claim involving a defective appliance. The professional needs to gather information regarding the product's design, manufacturing process, and any prior complaints or incidents. Which of the following approaches to discovery best balances the need for comprehensive information with the requirements of efficiency and proportionality under the applicable rules of civil procedure? Option A. Utilizing targeted interrogatories to identify key individuals and documents, followed by specific requests for production of those identified documents and relevant internal reports, and then deposing only those individuals whose testimony is essential to clarify specific factual disputes or expert opinions. Option B. Issuing a comprehensive set of interrogatories seeking detailed information on every aspect of the product's lifecycle, followed by a broad request for all documents related to the product's development and manufacturing, and then scheduling depositions of all engineers and quality control personnel involved. Option C. Relying solely on publicly available information and expert analysis of the defective product, without engaging in formal discovery, to build the subrogation case. Option D. Filing a motion to compel production of all internal company emails and memos related to the product, without first attempting to obtain this information through less intrusive discovery methods, and then immediately scheduling depositions of high-level executives. The correct answer is B. Issuing a comprehensive set of interrogatories seeking detailed information on every aspect of the product's lifecycle, followed by a broad request for all documents related to the product's development and manufacturing, and then scheduling depositions of all engineers and quality control personnel involved. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because subrogation professionals must navigate the complex discovery process while adhering strictly to the rules of civil procedure and ethical obligations to avoid obstruction of justice or undue burden on opposing parties. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need to gather essential evidence for a subrogation claim with the requirement to conduct discovery in a manner that is relevant, proportional, and not harassing. Careful judgment is required to select discovery tools that are most effective for the specific facts of the case and the information sought. The correct approach involves strategically employing a combination of discovery tools, prioritizing those that are most likely to yield the necessary information efficiently and effectively, while respecting the limitations imposed by procedural rules. This approach is justified by the principles of efficient litigation and the duty to conduct discovery in good faith. For instance, using interrogatories to obtain foundational facts and identify key documents, followed by requests for production to obtain those documents, and then using depositions to clarify ambiguities and explore witness testimony, represents a logical and compliant progression. This method ensures that each discovery tool is used for its intended purpose, minimizing redundancy and unnecessary expense, thereby aligning with the spirit and letter of the rules of civil procedure. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on one discovery tool, such as issuing a voluminous set of interrogatories, without considering the potential for overlap with other discovery methods or the proportionality of the request. This could lead to objections based on undue burden or harassment, potentially resulting in sanctions or the exclusion of evidence. Another incorrect approach would be to issue broad and vague requests for production that lack specificity, making it difficult for the opposing party to respond and increasing the likelihood of disputes. This fails to meet the requirement for particularity in discovery requests. Furthermore, conducting depositions without adequate preparation or without first exhausting other, less intrusive discovery methods could be seen as an attempt to harass or unduly burden the deponent, violating ethical guidelines and procedural rules. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of the case facts, the type of information needed, and the most appropriate discovery tools to obtain that information. This includes considering the cost-effectiveness and efficiency of each method, as well as potential objections from the opposing party. A tiered approach, starting with less intrusive methods and escalating as necessary, is generally advisable. Professionals must always remain mindful of their ethical obligations and the rules of civil procedure, ensuring that their discovery efforts are both effective and compliant. Question 10. Strategic planning requires subrogation professionals to anticipate and address potential jurisdictional conflicts when pursuing recovery on behalf of an insured. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical obligations in such a scenario? Option A. Relying solely on the insured's initial assessment of the responsible third party's location and assets. Option B. Proactively identifying and consulting with legal counsel experienced in all potentially relevant jurisdictions to ensure compliance with applicable laws and protect subrogation rights. Option C. Proceeding with recovery efforts based on the insurer's internal policies without specific consideration for the laws of the jurisdiction where the loss occurred. Option D. Assuming the laws of the insured's primary place of business govern all aspects of the recovery process. The correct answer is B. Proactively identifying and consulting with legal counsel experienced in all potentially relevant jurisdictions to ensure compliance with applicable laws and protect subrogation rights. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because subrogation professionals often encounter situations where the insured's recovery efforts may inadvertently impact the insurer's subrogation rights, especially when dealing with multiple parties and varying legal frameworks. Careful judgment is required to navigate these complexities and ensure compliance with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential jurisdictional conflicts early in the recovery process. This includes understanding the specific laws governing the claim, the location of the parties involved, and the applicable statutes of limitations. By consulting with legal counsel experienced in the relevant jurisdictions, subrogation professionals can ensure that all actions taken are legally sound and do not prejudice the insurer's subrogation interests. This proactive legal consultation is crucial for maintaining regulatory compliance and upholding ethical duties to the insurer. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the laws of the insured's primary place of business or the insurer's domicile automatically apply to all aspects of the recovery. This oversight can lead to significant regulatory failures, such as missing statutory deadlines for filing claims or failing to adhere to specific procedural requirements in the jurisdiction where the loss occurred or where the responsible third party resides. Such failures can result in the loss of subrogation rights, violating the insurer's trust and potentially leading to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with recovery efforts without thoroughly investigating the responsible third party's insurance coverage and assets in all potentially relevant jurisdictions. This lack of due diligence can result in pursuing recovery in a jurisdiction where assets are protected or where enforcement of judgments is exceptionally difficult, thereby wasting resources and jeopardizing the recovery for the insurer. This demonstrates a failure to meet the professional standard of care and a disregard for the insurer's financial interests. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of all relevant jurisdictions from the outset. This includes identifying the governing law, understanding the procedural rules, and assessing the enforceability of any potential recovery. Engaging specialized legal counsel early in the process is paramount to ensure that all actions align with the applicable regulatory framework and ethical guidelines, thereby protecting the insurer's subrogation rights and maximizing the likelihood of successful recovery. Question 11. Compliance review shows that following a significant property damage claim, the insurer identified a third party whose actions may have contributed to the loss. The insurer's internal policy mandates pursuing subrogation whenever a responsible third party is identified, regardless of the potential recovery amount or associated costs. Which approach best aligns with sound subrogation principles and professional practice? Option A. Immediately abandon subrogation efforts because the identified third party is a major supplier to the insured, to avoid damaging the business relationship. Option B. Pursue subrogation against the identified third party, adhering strictly to the internal policy of pursuing all identified responsible parties. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to evaluate the likelihood of successful recovery, the estimated costs of pursuit, and the potential impact on the insured before deciding whether to proceed with subrogation. Option D. Initiate subrogation proceedings, but inform the insured that they will be responsible for any legal costs incurred if the recovery is less than the expenses. The correct answer is B. Pursue subrogation against the identified third party, adhering strictly to the internal policy of pursuing all identified responsible parties. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of subrogation principles, specifically the concept of risk assessment in the context of potential recovery. The challenge lies in balancing the insurer's right to subrogation with the insured's potential exposure to additional costs or liabilities, and ensuring that the pursuit of subrogation is commercially reasonable and ethically sound. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could prejudice the insured or violate regulatory expectations regarding fair claims handling and the pursuit of recovery. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment that considers the likelihood of successful recovery, the potential costs associated with pursuing subrogation, including legal fees, expert witness costs, and administrative expenses, and the potential impact on the insured. This approach aligns with the fundamental principle of subrogation, which is to place the insurer in the same position as the insured to recover losses from a responsible third party. However, this right is not absolute and must be exercised reasonably. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing insurance practices, often imply or explicitly require that subrogation efforts be commercially viable and not unduly burdensome on the insured. Ethically, an insurer has a duty to act in good faith towards its insured, which includes not pursuing subrogation in a manner that is frivolous, vexatious, or disproportionately costly relative to the expected recovery. An incorrect approach would be to automatically pursue subrogation against any identified third party without a proper risk assessment. This fails to consider the commercial reasonableness of the recovery effort. If the estimated costs of pursuing subrogation significantly outweigh the potential recovery amount, or if the likelihood of success is very low, then pursuing such a claim could be considered an unreasonable expenditure of resources and potentially a breach of the insurer's duty to its policyholders. This approach could also lead to unnecessary litigation and costs, which might ultimately be borne by the insured through increased premiums or other mechanisms, violating the spirit of fair insurance practices. Another incorrect approach would be to abandon subrogation solely because the third party is a related entity or has a prior business relationship with the insured, without a thorough investigation into the merits of the claim and the potential for recovery. While such relationships may warrant careful consideration and potentially a more cautious approach, they do not automatically negate the insurer's subrogation rights. A failure to investigate and assess the situation objectively, based on the facts and applicable law, could be seen as a dereliction of the insurer's duty to recover its losses, potentially impacting its financial stability and the fairness of its premium structures. A third incorrect approach would be to pursue subrogation aggressively, without considering the potential impact on the insured's ongoing business relationships or future insurability. While the insurer's primary goal is recovery, it must also act in a manner that is consistent with its overall relationship with the insured and its ethical obligations, ignoring the potential negative consequences for the insured, such as alienating a key supplier or customer, without a compelling reason and a clear benefit to the insurer, demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a failure to consider the broader implications of subrogation actions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the subrogation opportunity. This begins with a clear understanding of the facts and the applicable law. Next, a comprehensive risk assessment should be conducted, quantifying the potential recovery, estimating all associated costs, and evaluating the probability of success. This assessment should also consider the impact on the insured. Based on this analysis, a decision should be made whether to pursue subrogation, negotiate a settlement, or abandon the effort. This decision should be documented and the rationale clearly articulated, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 12. Market research demonstrates that subrogation professionals often face situations where the causal link between an alleged negligent act and the resulting damages is not immediately apparent. In a scenario where an insured's property sustained damage due to a faulty installation of a new appliance, and the insured claims the installer breached their duty of care, what is the most critical element to meticulously establish for a successful subrogation recovery under the CSRP exam's regulatory framework? Option A. Demonstrating that the installer had a general duty to perform the installation competently. Option B. proving that the installer's actions or omissions directly and proximately caused the specific damages sustained by the insured's property. Option C, showing that the insured experienced a financial loss as a result of the appliance malfunction. Option D, quantifying the total value of the insured's property without regard to the installer's specific actions. The correct answer is A, demonstrating that the installer had a general duty to perform the installation competently. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the subrogation professional to navigate the complex interplay of the elements of negligence within the specific regulatory framework governing the Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional (CSRP) exam. The challenge lies in accurately identifying and applying these elements to a real-world claim, ensuring that the recovery efforts are legally sound and ethically compliant, without overstepping the bounds of permissible subrogation actions. The professional must exercise careful judgment to distinguish between direct and proximate causation, and to accurately assess the damages that are attributable to the at-fault party's actions, all while adhering to the strictures of the CSRP exam's jurisdictional requirements. The correct approach involves a meticulous analysis of the facts to establish each element of negligence: duty, breach, causation, and damages. This requires demonstrating that the at-fault party owed a duty of care to the insured, that this duty was breached through their actions or inactions, that this breach was the proximate cause of the damages suffered by the insured, and that these damages are quantifiable and legally recoverable. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the fundamental legal principles of negligence that underpin subrogation recovery, as implicitly or explicitly referenced within the CSRP exam's regulatory framework. Adhering to these elements ensures that the subrogation claim is well-founded, maximizing the likelihood of successful recovery while minimizing the risk of legal challenges or ethical violations. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the fact that the insured suffered a loss and that another party was involved, without establishing the specific legal elements of negligence. This fails to meet the burden of proof required for a successful subrogation action and disregards the foundational legal principles that the CSRP exam is designed to test. Another incorrect approach would be to assume causation without demonstrating the direct link between the breach of duty and the resulting damages. This speculative approach ignores the requirement for proximate cause, a critical element in negligence law. Furthermore, an approach that overstates or misattributes damages, failing to clearly link them to the at-fault party's breach, would also be professionally unacceptable, as it could lead to an unfounded claim and potential ethical repercussions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the claim facts against the established elements of negligence. This includes gathering all relevant documentation, interviewing witnesses, and consulting with legal counsel when necessary. The professional must then articulate how each element of negligence is satisfied by the evidence, ensuring that the subrogation demand is supported by a strong legal basis and is consistent with the ethical standards and regulatory requirements applicable to CSRP. Question 13. Stakeholder feedback indicates that subrogation professionals sometimes face pressure to file complaints rapidly to meet statute of limitations deadlines. In such situations, what is the best practice approach to drafting and filing the initial complaint? Option A. Prioritize filing the complaint immediately upon expiration of the statute of limitations, even if the investigation is not fully complete, to preserve the claim, and address any factual gaps through subsequent amendments. Option B. Conduct a thorough investigation and legal analysis to ensure the complaint accurately reflects all known facts and legal theories, and is filed within the statute of limitations, even if this requires a slight extension of the initial filing target. Option C. File a skeletal complaint with minimal factual allegations and legal theories to meet the statute of limitation, relying heavily on discovery to flesh out the claim. Option D. Immediately file a complaint based on preliminary findings, assuming the defendant will bear the burden of proving any inaccuracies or omissions in the pleading. Correct answer is A. Prioritize filing the complaint immediately upon expiration of the statute of limitations, even if the investigation is not fully complete, to preserve the claim and address any factual gaps through subsequent amendments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to balance the need for timely and accurate pleading with the potential for unintended admissions or defenses that could prejudice the subrogation claim. The pressure to file quickly, especially in a jurisdiction with strict time limits, can lead to rushed pleadings that may not fully reflect the investigation's nuances or anticipate the defendant's potential counterarguments. Accurate pleading is fundamental to establishing jurisdiction and stating a valid cause of action, but an overly aggressive or incomplete complaint can create significant hurdles later in the litigation process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the investigation findings and a careful drafting of the complaint that accurately states the facts giving rise to the subrogation claim, identifies the responsible parties, and asserts the appropriate legal theories. This includes ensuring all necessary elements for the cause of action are pleaded, and that the complaint is filed within the applicable statute of limitations. This approach aligns with the fundamental principles of civil procedure, which require pleadings to provide fair notice of the claim and its basis, and with the ethical duty of a subrogation professional to pursue claims diligently and competently, ensuring the integrity of the legal process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Filing a complaint that omits key factual details or legal theories, even if filed within the statute of limitations, is procedurally deficient. This can lead to motions to dismiss for failure to state a claim, requiring costly amendments and potentially delaying recovery. It also fails to provide adequate notice to the defendant, undermining the purpose of the pleading. Filing a complaint that makes speculative allegations or asserts claims without sufficient factual support, even if intended to preserve all potential avenues of recovery, is ethically problematic. This can lead to sanctions for frivolous claims and damages the credibility of the subrogation professional and their client. It also risks creating unintended admissions or defenses that the defendant can exploit. Delaying the filing of a complaint beyond the statute of limitations due to an incomplete investigation, even with the intention of gathering more evidence, is a critical procedural failure. This will almost certainly result in the claim being time-barred, extinguishing the subrogation rights and causing a complete loss for the insurer. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to pleading. This involves 1. A comprehensive review of all investigative materials to understand the factual basis of the claim. 2. Identification of all potentially liable parties and the legal theories supporting their liability. 3. Consultation with legal counsel to ensure compliance with all procedural rules and statutes of limitations. 4. Drafting the complaint with precision, ensuring all necessary elements are pleaded and that the allegations are supported by the available evidence. 5. Filing the complaint within the statutory deadlines and being prepared to amend as necessary based on further discovery. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that a recent subrogation claim involving a complex industrial accident has highlighted potential deficiencies in the initial scene investigation process. The review indicates that the assigned recovery professional, upon arriving at the scene, immediately began dismantling and removing damaged equipment to facilitate a quicker assessment of the loss, without first thoroughly documenting the scene in its original state or consulting with relevant stakeholders. This action was taken with the intent of expediting the recovery process, considering the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines applicable to subrogation professionals in the United States. Which of the following approaches to the initial scene investigation would be considered the most professionally sound and compliant? Option A. Proceed with the immediate removal of the most significantly damaged equipment to a secure location for detailed examination, as this will expedite the assessment of the root cause of the loss and potential recovery. Option B. Rely primarily on witness statements and initial reports from the site supervisor to reconstruct the scene, as physical evidence may be contaminated or altered by the time a formal investigation can be completed. Option C. Prioritize immediate, thorough photographic and videographic documentation of the entire scene, including the position and condition of all damaged property, before any significant alteration or removal of items occurs, followed by a systematic collection of evidence while maintaining a detailed chain of custody. Option D. Begin dismantling and removing equipment that appears to be the primary cause of the loss without extensive documentation, assuming that the insurance carrier will later conduct a more detailed forensic analysis if necessary. The correct answer is C. Prioritize immediate, thorough photographic and videographic documentation of the entire scene, including the position and condition of all damaged property, before any significant alteration or removal of items occurs, followed by a systematic collection of evidence while maintaining a detailed chain of custody. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the subrogation professional must balance the immediate need to secure evidence with the legal and ethical obligations to conduct the investigation in a manner that preserves the integrity of the scene and respects all applicable regulations. Failure to do so can jeopardize the subrogation claim, lead to legal challenges, and incur reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to prioritize actions that are both effective for recovery and compliant with legal and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process that prioritizes scene preservation and evidence collection in accordance with established protocols and legal requirements. This includes immediate notification of relevant parties, securing the scene to prevent contamination or alteration, and conducting a thorough, objective investigation. This approach is justified by the fundamental principles of evidence law, which require that evidence be admissible and reliable. In the context of subrogation, this means adhering to any specific state or federal regulations governing evidence collection, chain of custody, and reporting, as well as ethical guidelines that mandate honesty, diligence, and avoidance of conflicts of interest. For example, in many U.S. jurisdictions, spoliation of evidence can have severe consequences for a claim. An incorrect approach that involves immediate, unauthorized alteration of the scene, such as the premature removal of damaged property without proper documentation or consent, fails to uphold the integrity of the evidence. This can lead to challenges regarding the admissibility of evidence and may be viewed as a violation of legal discovery rules or even spoliation of evidence, depending on the jurisdiction and circumstances. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying the investigation significantly without a valid reason, can result in the loss or degradation of critical evidence, making it difficult or impossible to establish causation and liability. This can be seen as a failure to act with due diligence, a core ethical and professional responsibility. A further incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal information without objective, documented investigation, neglects the requirement for factual substantiation necessary for a successful subrogation claim. This can also lead to an incomplete understanding of the loss, potentially resulting in an inaccurate assessment of liability and recovery potential, and failing to meet professional standards of thoroughness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the governing regulations and ethical codes. This involves a proactive assessment of potential evidence preservation needs at the outset of a claim. The process should include clear protocols for scene investigation, documentation, and communication. When faced with complex situations, professionals should consult with legal counsel or experienced colleagues to ensure compliance and best practices are followed. The focus should always be on collecting reliable evidence in a legally sound and ethically responsible manner. Question 15. System analysis indicates that a subrogation professional handling a claim in a state where they are not regularly practicing needs to obtain specific documents from the opposing party that have been previously requested but not provided. The professional is familiar with discovery rules in their home jurisdiction, but is unsure of the exact procedural steps and filing requirements in the new jurisdiction for compelling discovery. Which of the following actions best reflects the required professional and procedural diligence? Option A. Submit a broad, general request for all relevant documents to the opposing party, without specific reference to the previously requested items or the need for a court order, hoping they will comply to avoid further complications. Option B. File a motion to compel discovery in the appropriate court, meticulously adhering to the specific rules of civil procedure for that jurisdiction regarding notice, content, and timing of such motions, after conducting thorough research on those rules. Option C. Assume the discovery rules are substantially similar to those in their home jurisdiction and file a motion to compel based on that assumption, making minor adjustments as deemed necessary. Option D. Contact the opposing counsel directly to demand the documents, bypassing formal court procedures, as this is often a quicker way to resolve discovery disputes. The correct answer is B. File a motion to compel discovery in the appropriate court, meticulously adhering to the specific rules of civil procedure for that jurisdiction regarding notice, content, and timing of such motions, after conducting thorough research on those rules. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate the complexities of court rules and procedures in a jurisdiction where they may have limited direct experience, while simultaneously adhering to strict ethical obligations regarding client representation and the integrity of the legal process. The core challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient recovery with the imperative to act within the bounds of established legal protocols and professional conduct. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are legally sound, ethically defensible, and ultimately serve the best interests of the subrogating entity. The correct approach involves diligently researching and applying the specific court rules of the relevant jurisdiction for filing a motion to compel discovery. This is the most appropriate professional practice because subrogation recovery often hinges on obtaining crucial information through discovery. Adhering to the precise procedural requirements for such motions, including proper notice, timing, and content, is essential for the motion to be considered by the court and to avoid its dismissal. This aligns with the ethical duty to represent clients competently and diligently, which includes understanding and following the rules of procedure in the forum where the action is brought. Furthermore, it upholds the integrity of the legal system by demonstrating respect for its established processes. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the discovery rules from a different jurisdiction or general principles of discovery are sufficient. This failure to adhere to specific local rules constitutes a breach of the duty of competence and diligence. It risks the motion being denied on procedural grounds, thereby jeopardizing the subrogation claim and potentially incurring additional costs and delays for the client. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the established legal framework. Another incorrect approach would be to bypass formal discovery procedures and attempt to directly contact the opposing party or their counsel to demand the information. While informal communication can sometimes be effective in the context of formal legal proceeding and a motion to compel, this bypasses the established procedural safeguards and the court's oversight. This could be viewed as unprofessional conduct, potentially leading to sanctions from the court and damaging the professional relationship with opposing counsel. It also fails to create a proper record for the court to review if the information is not voluntarily provided. A further incorrect approach would be to file a generic discovery request without tailoring it to the specific needs of the subrogation case and the information sought. While this might technically be a discovery request, it lacks the specificity and focus required for effective subrogation recovery and for a motion to compel to be persuasive. A poorly defined request may not elicit the necessary evidence and can be easily opposed by the other party, wasting valuable time and resources. The professional reasoning framework for this situation should involve a systematic process. First, identify the specific legal objective, e.g., obtaining specific documents or testimony. Second, determine the procedural mechanism available within the relevant jurisdiction's court rules to achieve that objective, e.g., motion to compel discovery. Third, thoroughly research and understand the precise requirements of those rules, including deadline, formatting, content, and service. Fourth, draft and file all necessary documents in strict compliance with those rules. Fifth, be prepared to respond to any court inquiries or opposing party challenges based on the established procedural framework. This structured approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically compliant, and strategically effective. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a subrogation professional, while investigating a fire loss, conducted an interview with the insured. During the interview, the professional focused heavily on questions designed to elicit information that would directly support the insurer's belief that a specific third-party product defect caused the fire, at times interrupting the insured's narrative to steer them back to these specific lines of questioning. The professional also did not offer to provide the insured with a copy of their recorded statement, nor did they explicitly ask for permission to record the conversation. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory obligations of the subrogation professional in this scenario? Option A. The professional was justified in their questioning technique, as the primary goal was to secure evidence for the subrogation claim, and providing a copy of the statement was not a mandatory requirement. Option B. The professional should have relied solely on the fire investigator's report and avoided interviewing the insured to prevent potential bias from influencing the investigation. Option C. The professional acted appropriately by focusing the interview on the most critical aspects of the claim to expedite the subrogation process. Option D. The professional should have conducted a more open-ended interview, allowing the insured to fully recount their experience without undue influence, and should have obtained consent for recording and offered a copy of the statement. The correct answer is D. The professional should have conducted a more open-ended interview, allowing the insured to fully recount their experience without undue influence, and should have obtained consent for recording and offered a copy of the statement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need to gather crucial evidence for a subrogation claim with the ethical and legal obligations owed to all parties involved, including the insured and potential third-party tortfeasors. The subrogation professional must act diligently and competently while adhering to strict rules regarding witness interviews and the handling of statements. Failure to do so can jeopardize the subrogation claim, lead to regulatory sanctions, and damage the insurer's reputation. The correct approach involves conducting a thorough and objective interview of the insured, focusing on eliciting factual information relevant to the loss and potential subrogation. This includes documenting the insured's account of events, any observations they made, and their knowledge of contributing factors or responsible parties. The interview should be conducted in a manner that respects the insured's privacy and avoids any suggestion of coercion or undue influence. Obtaining a signed written statement, if feasible and appropriate, serves as valuable evidence, but its content must be accurate and reflect the insured's voluntary account. This aligns with the professional duty to investigate claims thoroughly and ethically, ensuring that all relevant facts are captured to support a valid subrogation action. Adherence to company policy and any applicable state insurance regulations regarding claim investigation and documentation is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to pressure the insured into providing a statement that aligns with a predetermined subrogation theory, even if it misrepresents their actual recollection of events. This constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and potentially violates regulations prohibiting misrepresentation or deceptive practices in claim handling. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct the interview without proper documentation or to fail to obtain the insured's consent for recording or sharing their statement, which could violate privacy laws or company policy. Furthermore, neglecting to interview the insured altogether and relying solely on other sources of information would be a failure to conduct a complete and diligent investigation, potentially weakening the subrogation claim and demonstrating professional incompetence. Professionals should approach witness interviews by first understanding the objective of the interview within the context of the subrogation investigation. They must then plan the interview, considering the interviewee's role and potential knowledge. During the interview, the professional should maintain objectivity, ask open-ended questions, listen actively, and document information accurately and comprehensively. They must be mindful of legal and ethical boundaries, ensuring that the interview is conducted with respect and without coercion. Post-interview, the information should be reviewed, corroborated if possible, and properly filed as part of the claim investigation. Question 17. What factors determine the priority of subrogation rights between a primary insurer and an excess insurer when a loss exceeds the primary policy limits and both policies contain other insurance clauses? Option A. The amount of the loss and the total amount of coverage available from all insurers involved. Option B. The discretion of the claims adjuster to assign subrogation rights based on perceived ease of recovery. Option C. The specific wording of the other insurance clauses in both the primary and excess policies, the applicable state law governing insurance contracts and subrogation, and the order in which the policies were issued. Option D. The insurer that first paid the claim, regardless of policy provisions or applicable law. The correct answer is C. The specific wording of the other insurance clauses in both the primary and excess policies, the applicable state law governing insurance contracts and subrogation, and the order in which the policies were issued. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in subrogation where a policy provision, the other insurance clause, directly impacts the insurer's ability to recover funds from a third party. The complexity arises from the potential for conflicting other insurance clauses between the primary and excess insurers, and how these clauses interact with the insured's right to recover from a negligent third party. Professionals must navigate these contractual provisions and their legal implications to ensure proper allocation of loss and successful subrogation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of the other insurance clauses in both the primary and excess policies, alongside the specific facts of the loss and the applicable state law governing insurance contracts and subrogation. This approach correctly recognizes that the interplay between these clauses dictates which insurer bears the primary responsibility for the loss, and consequently, which insurer has the right to subrogate. The legal framework often prioritizes the primary insurer's right to subrogate up to the amount it has paid, and then allows the excess insurer to subrogate for amounts it has paid beyond the primary coverage, provided their other insurance clause doesn't preclude it. This aligns with the principle of indemnity, ensuring that the insured is made whole and that the responsible parties, including the negligent third party, ultimately bear the cost of the loss. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume the excess insurer automatically has subrogation rights simply because the loss exceeded the primary policy limits. This fails to account for the specific language of the other insurance clauses, which may contain escape or excess provisions that alter the order of coverage and subrogation rights. This oversight can lead to improper pursuit of subrogation against a party that is not contractually obligated to indemnify the excess insurer, or it could result in the excess insurer forfeiting its rights by not following the correct procedural steps dictated by the policy and law. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the other insurance clauses entirely and proceed with subrogation based solely on the fact that a negligent third party caused the loss. This approach disregards the contractual obligations between the insured and their insurers, and between the insurers themselves. It can lead to disputes between the primary and excess carriers over who has the right to subrogate and who is entitled to the recovery, potentially jeopardizing the subrogation effort and leading to litigation between the insurers. A third incorrect approach is to settle the subrogation claim with the negligent third party without first resolving the allocation of the loss between the primary and excess insurers. This can result in the wrong insurer receiving the recovery or the recovery being improperly distributed, potentially violating the terms of the excess policy and leading to a breach of contract claim against the subrogating insurer. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first meticulously reviewing all relevant insurance policies, paying close attention to the other insurance clauses and any endorsements. They should then research the applicable state law regarding the interpretation of other insurance clauses and subrogation rights. This foundational understanding will inform the strategy for pursuing subrogation, ensuring that the recovery is sought from the appropriate party and that the proceeds are allocated correctly between the involved insurers, thereby upholding the principles of indemnity and contractual fairness. Question 18. Examination of the data shows a workers' compensation claim where an employee sustained a severe injury while operating machinery that was allegedly defective. The employer's workers' compensation insurer has paid significant medical expenses and indemnity benefits. The subrogation department needs to determine the most effective strategy for pursuing recovery from the machinery manufacturer. Which of the following approaches best aligns with best practices for workers' compensation subrogation? Option A. Advise the injured employee to pursue a separate product liability claim against the manufacturer and await the outcome of that litigation before considering subrogation. Option B. Wait until the workers' compensation claim is fully resolved and all benefits have been paid before investigating the potential for third-party liability. Option C. Focus solely on recovering the medical expenses paid, as indemnity benefits are typically not recoverable in workers' compensation subrogation. Option D. Initiate a thorough investigation into the machinery's defect and the manufacturer's potential liability. Notify the manufacturer and their insurer of the subrogation claim, and actively engage in settlement negotiations or litigation to recover the paid benefits. The correct answer is D. Initiate a thorough investigation into the machinery's defect and the manufacturer's potential liability. Notify the manufacturer and their insurer of the subrogation claim, and actively engage in settlement negotiations or litigation to recover the paid benefits. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the insurer's right to subrogation with the employee's right to compensation and the complexities of coordinating with multiple parties. Careful judgment is needed to ensure all legal and ethical obligations are met while maximizing recovery for the insurer. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential subrogation opportunities early in the workers' compensation claim process. This includes thoroughly investigating the cause of the injury to determine if a third party was at fault, promptly notifying the responsible third party and their insurer of the subrogation interest, and actively pursuing recovery through negotiation or litigation, while also considering the employee's interests and potential impact on their benefits. This aligns with best practices in subrogation recovery, emphasizing diligence and comprehensive action to fulfill the insurer's fiduciary duty and statutory rights. An incorrect approach of delaying the investigation of third-party liability until the workers' compensation claim is settled or closed risks losing valuable evidence, missing statutory notice periods, and diminishing the potential for recovery. This failure to act diligently can prejudice the insurer's subrogation rights and may violate regulatory requirements for timely claim handling and recovery efforts. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on the employee to identify and pursue a third-party claim, without active involvement from the subrogation professional. This abdicates the insurer's responsibility to pursue its subrogation rights and may leave the employee without adequate support in navigating a separate legal action, potentially leading to a failure to recover damages that could offset workers' compensation benefits. A further incorrect approach is to pursue subrogation aggressively without considering the impact on the injured employee's overall recovery or potential for future medical needs. This can lead to ethical breaches and potentially violate statutory provisions that protect employees from double recovery or undue financial burden, undermining the principles of fairness and equity in the subrogation process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes early identification of subrogation potential, thorough investigation, diligent pursuit of recovery, and a balanced consideration of all parties' interests, guided by applicable workers' compensation statutes and subrogation best practices. Question 19. When evaluating a claim for potential subrogation recovery and presented with an insurance policy that contains a clear and unambiguous subrogation clause, an insurance company's recovery specialist discovers that the insured also had a separate contract with the at-fault party that contains a waiver of subrogation provision. The specialist is aware that state law generally permits equitable subrogation in the absence of a contractual right, which approach best aligns with the principles of subrogation and professional responsibility in this scenario. Option A. Abandon subrogation efforts entirely, as the waiver of subrogation in the insured's contract with the at-fault party definitively negates any possibility of recovery. Option B. Focus solely on statutory subrogation, assuming that a specific state statute might override the contractual provisions and allow for recovery. Option C. Immediately pursue equitable subrogation, as the existence of a waiver of subrogation in the insured's contract with the at-fault party creates an ambiguity that makes contractual subrogation impossible. Option D. Prioritize pursuing subrogation based on the explicit contractual subrogation clause in the insurance policy, while acknowledging the potential conflict with the waiver of subrogation in the insured's contract with the at-fault party, and seeking legal counsel on how to navigate this conflict. The correct answer is D. Prioritize pursuing subrogation based on the explicit contractual subrogation clause in the insurance policy, while acknowledging the potential conflict with the waiver of subrogation in the insured's contract with the at-fault party, and seeking legal counsel on how to navigate this conflict. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate competing interests and potential conflicts of interest while adhering to the principles of subrogation and ethical conduct. The professional must determine the most appropriate legal avenue for recovery, considering the specific facts and the available legal doctrines, without compromising the integrity of the recovery process or the client's best interests. The core of the challenge lies in accurately identifying and applying the correct type of subrogation, as misapplication can lead to failed recovery efforts, potential liability, and damage to professional reputation. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of the insurance policy, the underlying contract between the insured and the at-fault party, and any relevant state statutes. This analysis will reveal whether a contractual right to subrogation exists, if equitable principles support subrogation, or if a statutory right is applicable. By prioritizing the contractual right, The professional acknowledges the explicit agreement between the insurer and the insured, which is typically the strongest and most direct basis for subrogation. This aligns with the fundamental principle that an insurer, having paid a claim, steps into the shoes of the insured to recover from the responsible third party, as often contemplated by policy language and supported by common law. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on equitable subrogation when a clear contractual right exists. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses a more definitive and agreed-upon legal basis for recovery. While equitable subrogation serves as a fallback when no express contractual provision exists, it is generally disfavored when a contract clearly outlines the subrogation rights. Relying on it unnecessarily can weaken the subrogation claim and may be viewed as a failure to diligently pursue the strongest legal avenue. Another incorrect approach is to pursue statutory subrogation without first exhausting contractual and equitable grounds, or if no statute directly grants the right in the specific circumstances. Statutes are specific grants of authority and must be applied within their defined scope. If the facts do not align with the requirements of the statute, or if other, more direct legal avenues are available and clearly established, attempting to force the situation into a statutory framework is a misapplication of legal principles and can lead to the claim being dismissed. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume subrogation is possible without verifying the existence of a valid claim against a third party. Subrogation is a derivative right. It depends on the insured having a valid cause of action against the third party. Failing to conduct due diligence to establish the third party's liability before initiating subrogation proceedings is a fundamental error that undermines the entire recovery effort and constitutes professional negligence. The professional decision-making process should involve a systematic review of the claim file, identifying all relevant documents, policy, contracts, incident reports, etc. The professional must then research and apply the applicable legal doctrines of subrogation, prioritizing contractual rights, followed by equitable principles, and then statutory provisions, ensuring each is supported by the facts. This methodical approach ensures that the strongest and most appropriate legal basis for recovery is pursued, upholding ethical obligations and maximizing the likelihood of successful subrogation. Question 20. The efficiency study reveals that a significant portion of subrogation recovery attempts are being delayed due to prolonged internal debates regarding the applicability of two distinct state statutes to a particular property damage claim involving a commercial tenant and a landlord's insurance policy. One statute broadly covers insurance contract disputes, while the other specifically addresses landlord-tenant property damage liabilities. Which approach to statutory research is most critical for resolving this impasse and ensuring timely, legally sound recovery? Option A. Initiate recovery actions under both statutes simultaneously to cover all legal bases, pending further clarification. Option B. Rely on the statute that has been historically applied by the company in similar cases, regardless of recent legislative changes. Option C. Prioritize the statute that offers the broadest potential for recovery, assuming it will encompass the specific circumstances. Option D. Conduct a detailed analysis to determine which statute-specific provisions most directly and precisely apply to the landlord-tenant property damage liability in question. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the statute that offers the broadest potential for recovery, assuming it will encompass the specific circumstances. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a subrogation professional to navigate potentially conflicting statutory provisions and interpret their application to a specific claim scenario. The core difficulty lies in determining which statute governs the recovery process when multiple statutes might appear relevant, and the consequences of misinterpreting this can lead to significant financial loss for the insurer and potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the applicable regulatory framework, thereby protecting the insurer's subrogation rights and avoiding legal challenges. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of the relevant state statutes governing subrogation and insurance claims, specifically focusing on the definitions and scope of each statute. This approach is right because it prioritizes a direct and accurate interpretation of the law as enacted by the legislature. By identifying the statute that most directly addresses the nature of the loss and the parties involved, the subrogation professional ensures that the recovery efforts are legally sound and enforceable. This aligns with the ethical duty to act with diligence and competence, and the regulatory requirement to adhere to all applicable laws. For instance, if a specific statute outlines a particular notice period or a limitation on subrogation for certain types of claims, adherence to that statute is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on industry custom or prior internal company practices without verifying their current legal standing. This is professionally unacceptable because industry customs, while often practical, do not supersede statutory law. If a custom conflicts with a statute, the statute prevails. Relying on outdated practices can lead to the loss of subrogation rights if those practices are no longer legally permissible under current statutes. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a broader, more general statute applies when a more specific statute exists that directly addresses the situation. This is a failure to conduct thorough statutory research. Specific statutes are generally intended to govern particular circumstances, and their provisions will override general statutes when there is a conflict or overlap. Failing to identify and apply the most specific governing statute can result in improper recovery attempts, potential legal challenges from the at-fault party or their insurer, and a violation of the duty to act competently. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of recovery over legal accuracy by initiating recovery actions based on a preliminary understanding of the statutes without conducting a comprehensive review. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. The professional obligation is to ensure that all actions are legally justified. Rushing the process without a firm grasp of the statutory landscape can lead to actions that are voidable or unenforceable, ultimately harming the subrogating entity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, clearly define the factual circumstances of the claim. Second, identify all potentially relevant statutes based on the nature of the loss, the parties involved, and the jurisdiction. Third, conduct in-depth research into each identified statute, paying close attention to definitions, scope, limitations, and any specific provisions related to subrogation. Fourth, compare and contrast the statutes to determine which one most directly and specifically governs the claim. Fifth, consult with legal counsel if there is any ambiguity or uncertainty regarding statutory interpretation. Finally, document the research and the rationale for the chosen statutory approach.